I'm done. I'm finally done. Okay, before we share the results, let's take a second to see how we got here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. One flam. No. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. One flam. No. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 8, 15. One flam. No. Now that's not really the whole truth. The video is Love Island and not Minecraft. But that was the process until I counted all 189,000 notes. Now I've covered some of this already, so I'll give you a quick recap of front ensemble. First up, we have AQ played the most marimba notes, followed by Mystique with only 19 less, and then United. Next, we can see that Cap City played for the highest percentage of time, followed by RCC, and then AQ 4 points behind that. And finally, we can see GMU played the fastest hand speed, followed by Mystique, followed by RCC. And if you want more info on any of that, check out my video on marimba specifically in the description below. Next, let's recap vibes, but let's go a little bit faster. First, AQ played the most notes, followed by Mystique, then United. Next up, we can see that for a show utilization, that's the percent of time they're playing, Cap City won, then AQ, then United. Finally, fastest hand speed goes to Broken City, MCM, AQ. You want more info? Another video down below. Synths. Connexus played the most, followed by Rhythm X, followed by Rhythmic Force. Next up, utilization. Pulse played the highest percent, followed by RCC, followed by Rhythmic Force. Finally, hand speed. We see that Cap City had the fastest hand speed, followed by Pulse Synth 1, followed by Pulse Synth 2. It was the same 16th note run. You want more info, like who played the most samples? Another video down below. Now you're probably thinking, Nick, you're going way too fast. I want you to compare these stats. Guess what? Spreadsheet down below. Now let's move on to some new data. First up, Atlantic Quest played the most snare notes. Who would have guessed when your show starts like this? Presenting their program. Next up, we also counted all of the flams played by every snare line. GMU won flams. And Mystique played the most shots. And Monarch played the most diddles. Aside from the winners of each of these captions, we can see a lot of differences in the data. Stuff like Atlantic Quest snare line plays almost twice as much as Rhythm X's snare line. The number of flams played by GMU is over 4 times as much as the number of flams played by United. Or the number of shots played by MCM is about 6 times as much as the number of shots played by Monarch. And then finally for diddles, the number of diddles played by Monarch is about 3 times the number of diddles played by Rhythm X. These are pretty big ranges when we consider the highest to the lowest in each of these captions. And notice the top 5 most playing snare lines all placed 10th or lower. Next, let's look at utilization, where we see that Rhythmic Force's snare line played for almost 60% of the show. By comparison, Matrix snare line played for 30% of the show. We're going to preview some of the technologies that we developed for this statistics sheet a little bit here, where I show you what the timeline of these sections look like. Take a look for Rhythmic Force. Notice how they're playing almost the entire show. And then here's what Matrix's show looks like. Notice the big gaps in between playing. Now, if you want to see that graph for any section or combination of sections or combinations of groups or the average of all groups across all sections or anything you can imagine, I'll put a link in the description below where you can download the Microsoft BI report. And I'll also put a montage of a bunch of combinations at the end of the video for people who don't want to figure out how that technology works. Next up, let's talk about quads. So first up, total number of notes. Atlantic Quest, once again, in first place. That means at this point they have won marimbas, vibes, snares, and quads. I guess they play a lot. You can see here that Atlantic Quest played about twice as much, or a little under twice as much, as Rhythm X's quad line. But not only did we count number of notes, we counted notes per drum. So here we can see drum 4, 3, 2, 1, and Spock 2 and 1, the number of notes played on those individual drums. This data is a tiny bit misleading for RCC, for they only wrote on drum 2 in a lot of the sections of the show, and then left the task to the members or the instructors to rewrite the arounds. So for them, the data's a little bit off. Notice that 2 of the groups did not have a second Spock, those being Rhythmic Force and United. Congratulations to Broken City for playing the most drum 4, playing 4 more drum 4s than Mystique. Congratulations to Matrix for playing the most on drum 3. Congratulations to RCC, but probably AQ for playing the most on drum 2, given the fact that RCC's arounds were rewritten. And congratulations to Atlantic Quest for playing the most on drum 1. Congrats to Rhythmic Force for playing the most on Spock 2, but they only had 1 Spock. And congrats to Monarch for playing the most on Spock 1. Matrix, United, Infinity, and Atlantic Quest were the only groups to have more on drum 3 than on drum 4. And Infinity and Cap City were the only groups to have more on drum 1 than on drum 2. 5 of the groups used their highest Spock more than their lowest Spock, and Mystique had the most even Spock usage with only 1 difference between Spock 1 and Spock 2. I like this table a lot because it shows there's a lot of difference and variation between how different arrangers write for quad drums. Also, congratulations to Mystique for being the only quad line to have drum 3 or 4 have the most notes compared to the other drums. Just like for snares, we counted rudiments, flams, shots, diddles, and also crossovers for quads. We can see here that a GMU played the most and the highest percentage of flams. Matrix played the most shots. Monarch played the highest percentage of diddles, but they played fewer notes, so Connexus actually played the most diddles. And Rhythm X had the highest percentage of crossovers, but because they played so few notes, Infinity actually had more crossovers than them. Next, let's look at utilization expressed as percent of show playing, where we'll see that Rhythmic Force is the only quad line that spends more time playing than time resting, winning with 52% utilization, while Monarch and Rhythm X are at the bottom with only 27% utilization. Notice that while AQ had 200 more notes than Rhythmic Force, they played for 12% less of their show, showing that their notes were jammed closer together when they were playing. Finally, we can see what we're talking about with that jamming together, where we look at the average hand speed, and then we express hand speed in percentiles from the 50th percentile all the way up to the fastest hand speed, where we see that Rhythmic Force actually had the slowest average hand speed for their quad line, while the fastest average hand speed was Matrix, and the max hand speed played by any quad line was GMU. Let's pass it over to Dadisi to give us a little bit of information about bass drums.
Alright, let's look at the bass stats. First, we have total notes and total unisons. There's a difference of over 1,500 notes and 244 unisons from the highest count to the lowest count. Broken City is way in the lead with over 400 notes above Connexus. Now, Broken City's score might seem a little skewed because they have 6 drums, so they have 6 people contributing to the unisons and to all the split notes. But even if we took bass 6 entirely out of the show, Broken City would still be in the lead. Basically, they played a lot of notes in 2024. Next, you'll see a count of split notes. These are notes that were not played in unison with the entire bass line. The award for the most split notes played by any WGI finalist bass drummer in 2024 with 386 notes goes to MCM's second bass. Congratulations. In fact, MCM's bass 2, 3, and 4 all won most notes for their respective bass drums. AQ's top bass and POW's bottom bass won most notes for bass 1 and bass 5. And the award for the least amount of notes played by any bass drummer would have to go to RCC's bottom bass. But he still got a bronze medal, so don't feel too bad. In fact, all of the WGI medalists are in the bottom half of our total bass drum notes count. And the 2 lowest scoring WGI finalists are second and third in total bass drum notes. You could certainly make a correlation that playing less notes on bass drum will lead you to place higher in WGI finals, but as a bass drummer, I'm not going to talk about that. Moving on to the percentage of notes, we would ideally want to see each bass drum average at 20% or 1/5 of total notes, but realistically that isn't the case. Infinity's top bass contributed way more to the show than the other bass drums. She played 7% more notes than her bass 2. And Rhythm X's bottom bass is the only bottom bass that didn't play the least amount of notes in their line. His contribution to the show is equal to third bass, which is a crazy stat to think about. Next, we wanted to count some of the ornaments that bass drummers play, so we decided on diddles, shots, flams, rim clicks, single splits, and hand-to-hands. The diddle count is pretty on par with what I would expect, other than Infinity and United. And the shot count seems pretty standard as well. But I'm surprised that some of these bass lines don't play any shots. And that could be an error on our part. Maybe they added shots where they aren't written. But even to have no shots written seems pretty surprising. Now, GMU and POW's shot count is a little shocking. 12 of George Mason's shots come from one measure at the end of their show. So excluding that one effect measure, they really only played 3 shots. But POW Percussion legitimately played 18 shots in their show. And compare that to Matrix, who only played a single shot. And Rhythm X was also the first and only time I've seen a unison shot. And it kind of didn't sound bad. The flam count is egregious. 7 bass lines didn't play any flams. And the average flam count is only 2. I'll hop off my soapbox for now, and we can take a look at this rim click count. POW, y'all played 3.5 times the average rim click count, especially compared to some of these bass lines that played none, or even MCM and Rhythm X with their one singular unison rim click. For the rudiments, we decided to only count single splits and hand-to-hands because those are some of the most common and easily identifiable bass drum rudiments. POW wins another caption here with 19 single splits. That's quite a lot, but it's cool. I'm just glad that no one played 0 because that would have been a little awkward. But I would expect a WGI finalist bass line to play like 5. And I'm not surprised that Infinity won the hand-to-hand caption. That seems pretty on par for Infinibass. But I was surprised that we only counted 3 rudiments for RCC. I just would have thought they played more. For utilization, it's no surprise that the more notes you play, the more you're going to be utilized in the show. But man, rhythmic force with 50% utilization. When you think about all the times when bass drummers typically aren't playing, like during another section's feature or during a ballad moment, it's kind of odd that they were able to squeeze in that much drumming, especially compared to a group like United that only played for less than 90 seconds of an over 7-minute show.
Thanks, Dadisi, for covering bases. And if you want to compare flams of quads to snare flams or utilization across any battery instrument or anything your heart could want, spreadsheet in the description down below. Now I'm sure you're wondering, what's going to make me win? Now we can calculate that using correlation based on all the data that we've had thus far. Let's take a look and figure out what will give us the highest probability of winning our WGI competitions. First, let's refresh ourselves with some important values, like who won and what were their scores. Here are the groups ranked in competitive order. Here are the groups re-ranked by how much their dues cost. Notice the asterisks by RCC. This is because for RCC, your dues are dependent on if you're an in-state resident of California, or if you're an out-of-state, or you're an international student, because they have to register for the class at RCC, like the community college in Riverside. And that changes a lot. Like your dues can vary by like over $800 depending on where you're from. So it could be $2,200, or I believe the max it could be is like $3,200. Here are the groups ranked by the number of Instagram followers they have. And here are the groups ranked by the number of views that their show got on YouTube. As a Mystique alum, I see we should have medaled. Using all the data we have, we can use the Pearson correlation coefficient to figure out which variable will give us the biggest predictor of having the highest score. So this is us taking the Pearson correlation coefficient and picking one of the axes, whether that be the hand speed of vibes or the number of Instagram followers a group has, and then using the Y as the score that group received at WGI Finals this year. Here we can see that the greatest predictor of who will win WGI is your number of Instagram followers. The second greatest predictor of who will win WGI Finals is your number of YouTube views. Now given, this is correlation, not causation. Now the next best predictor is the hand speed that your marimbas play for the fastest 30% of their show. Very interesting. With a correlation of 0.59, this is just a tiny bit less of a predictor than the correlation of YouTube views of 0.63. Now this is one of the funny ones. The next best predictor is the percent of the show that your snare drums play, with a correlation of negative 0.56. That means the groups where their snares play less score better. Other strong correlations include how fast your vibes play. The faster your vibes play, the better you'll score. The less your quads play on drum 1, the better you'll score. The less time your bass drums spend playing, the better you'll score. But the faster your bass drum book is, the better you'll score. The longer your show is, the better you'll score. And the slower your synth book is, the better you'll score. So we've learned that Instagram followers and views matter, maybe. They might just be correlated. And you should have faster marimbas playing and way less snare drums playing. I mean, didn't we always know that? But next, we can find what's the best bang for your buck, because we have all these groups' dues and we have how many notes they played. And so here we can see the dollars per pitch. So this is the number of dollars you paid that organization for the number of pitches that they gave you. We do it in pitches because to play a block chord is a little bit more pricey than to play just a single note in my mind. And for like battery drums, pitch is just like the number of attacks, right? So here we can see that the most expensive positions to march this past season were Matrix Synth 3 and then Matrix Synth 2, costing $871 per pitch and $781 per pitch respectively. Next, we can look all the way to the far right to see that the best place to march to get the bang for your buck was AQ Marimba, then AQ Snare, costing 78 cents per pitch and then 81 cents per pitch respectively. Take a second and look at this graph and figure out how much did you pay per pitch. Now we've made a lot of statements which insinuate that playing more is better. And that could be argued, but I would make the argument that the lesson is the playing. When we play our instruments, that's when we learn. And in fact, I think Paul might agree.
That alone is an education. When people figure out how to do just the one count of each one, and if they've got a re-gripping problem, it's exposed to the point where by simply doing the exercise will be the lesson. You see what I mean? As an instructor, I don't have to say too much. I just can introduce that, and I can just look at them and say, "Yeah, feels weird, doesn't it?" You know, and that's the lesson, right? And so a lot of the exercises I do are like that. By simply playing the exercise is the lesson itself.
Thanks for that, Paul. And I know at your PASIC clinic you said less is more this year, but you and Sandy wrote the first most and the fourth most marimba attacks in the activity for DCI, but that's not for us to talk about right now. Another video in the description down below. But that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data. See, we can take all of this data, clean it, and import it into a data visualization tool like Microsoft BI, like I hinted at earlier. This can give us really crazy visualizations, like what does the average WGI show look like? Or what does the timeline of each individual show look like? Or what does the timeline of top 5 look like? Or middle 5? Or bottom 5? Or what about the timeline of front ensemble only across every WGI show? Or what about the timeline of battery only across every WGI show? And we can customize this to our heart's degree, and I'll put all of this in the comments or the description down below so you can play around with this. Now we can get even deeper with this and find out what is the most likely thing to be happening during a WGI show, because we have every single measure and we can see who's playing during that measure. So we can see that the most likely thing to be happening is marimbas, vibes, and synths are playing, so full front. The next most likely thing to be happening is the full ensemble is playing all 6 sections. And the third most likely thing to be happening, and remember this is across all 15 WGI shows, is for just synths to be playing. Funny enough, the fourth most popular thing to be happening is nothing. Now given we didn't count like marching cymbals or racks or the xylo or drum set or bell kits, but heuristically by my subjective reading of all of these full scores, I can tell you it's probably nothing was happening as opposed to one of those sections being the only one playing while marimbas, snares, etc. were not playing. So kind of interesting that almost 10% of our shows is nothing going on. Now, for those of you that don't want to figure out how to make an account with Microsoft and be able to use Microsoft BI, I'll put a montage of all of these graphs at the end of the video. That way you can scroll through and see group by group what their specific data tables and graphs look like. Now, what about the least most likely thing to happen? There was exactly one measure of bass, tenors, and marimba, one measure of snare, bass, and vibraphone, and one measure of just bass and tenors across all of these measures that we counted. So kind of interesting for those things to be happening. And really it's that those things are happening without synths that makes it so rare. We can zoom out a little bit and look at utilization or percent of playing by number of groups playing, seeing that it's about 12% of the time we have a full ensemble moment across all of WGI, and then about 5% of the time it's full ensemble minus one of those sections, and following we can look at all the rest of these stats. So the most common thing to be happening is 3 of those sections are playing, happening about 24% of the time, and once again, about 10% of the show, nothing is happening, if we ignore the fact that I didn't count some of the instruments. Now we can use conditional probability to figure out what is the percent of notes that one group has while another group is playing. So we look at this first table here, we can see that we have the sections on the left, and given that the section in the row is playing, or the section in the left, what is the probability that the column section is playing? So along the diagonal, you see we have mostly 100%. We made this greater than one note, so there is some 99% because we're not including measures that just have one note. So you would read this as, while the snares are playing, 66% of tenor notes across all of top 15 WGI occurs. Or while the vibes are playing, 39% of snare notes occur while across all WGI groups. So we also have the same table but created for percent of time playing instead of percent of notes, because we're going to get a little bit of differences in that. We look at snare percent of time playing while vibraphones are playing, it goes all the way up to 58% from that 39%. So there's more dense snare passages while the vibes are not playing, is what that tells us. Once again, I'll split all this up so you can look at the very end and see how each group compares. And if you want to download Microsoft BI or you want to just use it in the web, you can hit the play button and see how this changes over the course of a show. This project would not have been possible without so many individuals who helped me out along the way. First off, special thanks to Jacob Cook, who basically wrote every Microsoft BI graph and table you saw, and really excelled the veracity of this project. This would not be anything without him. Thank you to Dadisi, who helped so much with the bass drum stuff and inspired me to get on it and finish it, and did some counting of a number of the groups for the bass drums and even transcribed RhythmX so we would have that. Thank you to Nikolai, who was the inspiration with me for this project originally. And I remember 9 months ago sitting in my house counting all of Pulse's instruments and deciding that maybe we can't count all of this. And here we are 190,000 notes later, having counted most of it. So thank you to those 3 people in particular, and then thank you to way more than I could ever mention, who have helped me along this project. Everyone who sent me the music or shared information, or helped make this possible. This activity is a community, and that's what makes it special. So thank you so much. And I think that's everything I have for you today. If you've enjoyed this content, consider subscribing to my Patreon, leaving a like, a comment, a share, or engaging in this content in any way. It really, really helps me out and helps me support myself so I can make more ridiculous content like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll go and end it out and put a little montage of all the different groups' graphs at the end. So if you want to scroll through and find your graph or for your group or for a specific group, you can do that. Thanks, and I'll see you later. I need to go practice. I wonder if I can count the distance traveled by every member.